and thank you for joining us on what is the penultimate. I can't even say that right, but hey ho, it's the last but one Ask TCW podcast. We've got 12 questions, 4 co-hosts, 1 host. Let's go. Oh, well, that was a good intro, weren't it, folks? But anyway, thank you very much for joining me, Aaron Lord. And I'm delighted to say the 4 co-hosts tonight are Jono Bullard. Good evening. Paul Balm.
Hello.
Hello. Andy Haywood.
Evening.
Evening. And finally, it's Adam Reddish.
Evening, all.
Good evening. Well, thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. Are we sad that it's the last but one Ask TCW podcast?
No.
Okay, it's going well so far. Right, let's get into the 12 questions. If you'd like to get involved with the show tonight, then you can do. Just get involved via Twitter, and our handle is @CatsWhiskersTV, and just use the hashtag AskTCW. Right, let's get cracking, guys. Number 1 comes from Mr_Leinster on Twitter, and he says, should we pull our netminder earlier than we do? I see teams being ballsy and gaining. I don't think we are. Friday night was too late for me, obviously referring to the game against Sheffield. Adam, I'll come to you first on that one.
Ooh, difficult. I suppose I'm going to sit on the fence and say it just depends on the circumstances of the game, doesn't it? I mean, do we have the forwards really that can give enough confidence that they'll keep the puck for long enough to actually generate some chances with an extra skater? On the evidence of this season, no. So, without wanting to sound too cliched, it really only does take about 2 or 3 seconds to create a good chance. So, I mean, it's mixed, isn't it? It works for some teams, it doesn't work for others. You might get a good run of times where you pull the netminder with, say, 2.5 minutes to go, and you get a goal back. You might even get 2 goals back if you need to pull your netminder that early. I think we saw Cardiff do that, didn't we, in a midweek game a few weeks ago? So, yeah, I don't think you can necessarily say it's too early or too late. I suppose it gives you longer to fashion some chances and give you a good chance of scoring goals. But you might only pull the netminder with 30 seconds left and get that goal that you need with an extra skater. So I think it's horses for courses, really.
Mr. Balm, where do you stand on pulling the netminder? Do you think we should do it earlier than we do?
I think the one thing Adam sort of missed off with that really was desperation. I mean, we've not really been in a situation where we've been that desperate to win, because basically we're so long now the games have actually been fairly meaningless for us. So I think I don't know. I think it is very much a dual-edged sword. I mean, I remember a few years ago Newcastle, when I think they were the Jesters, pulled the keeper with about 5, 6, 7 minutes left. Got the 3 goals that it was I think they needed. But is that going to happen every time? No, it's not.
Finally, Andy, I'll come to you on this question.
I think a lot of it has to do with the opposition as well. I can't honestly remember a time where you sort of thought, we had real good zone entry or good puck possession with a couple of minutes to go. I kind of feel rely almost as much as yourselves in sort of pulling the netminder, because you have to guarantee basically that they're not just going to get the puck straight away, go down the other end and score, and then it does become a futile sort of. It becomes a futile task. To touch on what Adam and Paul have said, horses for courses in that aspect. I think a lot of it goes down to what's going on the ice at the time, and if you get a good enough opportunity. And ultimately, I don't think, if my memory is correct, I can't think of a point with sort of 2-3 minutes to go where we had a really good opportunity to get the netminder off and get the extra skater on. So I can appreciate the sentiment behind it, but like they say, it only takes a couple of seconds to score a goal, and that works both ways. And obviously, if the net's empty, it does become somewhat easier. I would think.
I will say one thing though, on all that, if this weekend we're getting a situation where we need to pull the keeper early, I'll actually probably be quite glad. I don't think we're even going to get close to that, but I don't know.
Yeah, but if you look at our power play this year, which has been atrocious, that doesn't really give you any confidence that we can do anything with an extra skater, going forwards.
That's true.
We don't have that sort of buzz or vibrancy, in the offensive zone to, make a clever pass or, pull a D-man out of position to create a bit of room to have a shot. It's just flat. So even with an extra forward up top, it's no guarantee that we're actually going to make any quality goal-scoring chances.
Very true. Right, I shall move on to the next question, and this one comes from Richard Martin at TwistAgain1964, and he quite simply says, can anyone explain to me why we bother with goal line judges? So, Jono, can you explain to Richard for us, please?
I can see his point, because I think this goes back to the Sheffield game as well, where the goal judge put his light on with 16 seconds to go, where Panthers thought they might have scored an equaliser, and the referee didn't even bother going to consult him. He just watched the goal out straight away. So it's a fair enough question. I can't understand if there is a contentious decision like that, especially with the fact that the goal line technology we've been promised still hasn't appeared. Then why wouldn't the referee use every available resource that is available to him, one of which is the goal judge, who sits right behind the goal? So I think the officials ought to use them more. I know it's the referee's final decision, but I can understand why Richard has asked the question.
Paul, you've been coming to ice hockey for a very long time, as everybody who knows you will know. They play an important role, don't they? So what's your view on Richard's question there? Well,
somebody's got to throw cups of water over fans in all, haven't they? And if there's the line judges, who's going to do it? Yeah, it's, they are there purely to, provide a service to the referee. So if the referee isn't going to ask them, then you say, well, yeah, why bother? But by the same token, they put the light on, and half the time, that's the only way I know we've scored. So there is something.
See the day that when we don't have goal line judges, or do you think they'll be around for as long as hockey's around?
I think. Well,
go on, Paul. You started there.
Yeah, I think with technology as it is, then we will reach a point where, as soon as the puck will cross the line, it'll trigger and the light will go on. I mean, if we go into goal line technology, we're probably not that far away. But the traditionalist in me says that you wouldn't like to see them fade out.
John, I think you started to say something. Sorry, Adam, go on.
That was Adam.
Oh, no. John, you go first.
I was going to say, I think in the NHL already, they don't have goal judges. As soon as the puck crosses the line, I think the light automatically comes on.
So about 20 years till we get it, then?
Probably.
What I will say, I think it depends on...
Jono's kind of took my thoughts away there. I totally agree with what he was saying.
Go on then, Andy. You just got in
there.
What I would say
is, I think a lot of it will depend on why the goal's been waved off. There is every chance. I mean, I don't. We don't know this for certain because we didn't get any explanation, as far as I'm aware. But there's every chance that he might have seen that the puck did go in, but his intentions to blow the whistle were before the puck had gone in. So there's no need to to communicate with the goal judge in that sense. Just playing devil's advocate in that regard. If he knows,
surely then he would signal that he was waving the goal off.
Well, yeah, but he didn't.
Is the IHL?
Yeah, it's just that there will always be times when a goal is waved off and there isn't a need to go to the goal judge. Whether that was the case on Friday or not, we will never know, because once again we've been given no explanation. And I would like to think that as we move on, that would be something that will be brought up, and as fans we would get that privilege, not necessarily having the referees mic'd up like they do in the NHL, but at least, there's a few times this season where the referees explained to Steph and he's relayed it onto the fans as to why some decisions, happened. That should be the norm for me, regardless of whether, a goal judge is needed or not. We should at least be given the courtesy of having it explained as to why.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%, to be honest, Andy. So we shall move on to our next question, and this one comes from David Spence, at David M. Spence on Twitter. And he says, on a scale of 0 to absolutely something-tastic, which I can't repeat, but I imagine that you'll be able to imagine what I'm saying there. How good is the news that we won't have to see Carter in the playoffs? So obviously I'm guessing David isn't a big fan of Matt Carter. So I'll open it up to the floor. And John, I'll come to you first.
It's never nice for a guy to get an injury, and you don't wish an injury on any player. But I think this will become clearer in the next question that you've got after this one. He would have been one of my scratchers anyway. So on that score, I'm quite happy. But I don't like to see anyone get an injury.
Adam?
Yeah, like Jono said, it's the guy's livelihood, and you don't know what the severity of the injury is at this stage. It might be something that might bother him for the next 2-3 seasons. So I don't think that's been communicated as of yet. So yeah, I mean it's unpleasant for the player concerned. He probably is a bit gutted to be missing out on what could potentially be a very, very good end to a rather mundane season. But as Jono said, I don't think that he would have made it if we had the luxury of sitting an import just on his form this season. I think that he's been terrible, if I'm being honest. I just think there's a lot of hype with his signing, but then when is there not any hype about a player signing for the Panthers? But he's just totally not lived up to it. So yeah, sad that he's injured, of course, but I'm not overly gutted that he won't be lining up for the Panthers this weekend.
Quickly, Andy, do you feel any different to what Jono and Adam said there?
I don't know, to be brutally honest, because he's the kind of player that style of hockey that he casual, nonchalant, sort of, almost sort of not trying, but I'm sure he is, that kind of thing. But I just kind of think that usually in the playoffs there's always that one play where someone who you perhaps wouldn't quite expect will do something that they perhaps haven't done all season. To hark back to the first time I saw us win it, I don't think anyone in the arena in Sheffield in that second leg expected to see Corey Nielsen step up and take a penalty shot. But he finished it absolutely fantastically. And I don't know whether with the luxury of dropping people, I don't know whether he'd be one of my two. But that doesn't mean to say that he's not underperformed this season, because in my opinion he severely has. But having said that, there's always that chance that he's just going to do exactly what he's been doing for the rest of the year. So I don't know ultimately, but if that is the last time that we've ever seen Mike Carter play, I'm certainly not going to be crying in the off season.
Paul, just obviously very quickly, will you be crying in the off season?
Not for that reason. Basically, to answer Spencer's question, about a 7.
About a 7. Okay.
Out of
Right,
5,
so
Paul.
moving on. Right, as Jono said, it moves us nicely into the next question, and that one comes from @_Asbo_ on Twitter, and they ask quite simply, who are your healthy scratches for the playoffs? We are carrying spare imports, even with the injury to Matt Carter. So, Paul, I'll come to you first.
How many do I need? Oh, yes, it's one. Yeah. I'll be controversial.
Go on.
Nicky Foruk.
Okay.
And Passel.
Okay. Andy, I'll come to you next. I'll come round in the other opposite order. Go on.
Blimey. Possibly the same. Other than that, probably. Oh, geez, I really don't know. War.
Okay, so you'd go obviously a defenseman there, and you're going Passel as well, yeah?
Oh, yes, sorry. Apologies. Yeah.
Okay. Adam?
Can I be even more controversial than Paul?
Go on.
I will say Passel, and I would also say Brad Moran, because I think he contributes absolutely next to nothing to this team. Absolutely next to nothing. I've been so disappointed with him this season. Even though he's captain, that's why I said it's controversial, because... And Players Player of the Year, absolutely. But, surely you're judged about the output on the ice, and I think that he's been massively short of expectations this year, probably even more so than Matt Carter. So, yeah, he's the captain, and it'd probably never happen. But, if I had my way, that would be a real stinging message to the players to say absolutely nobody is safe. Maybe it should have happened a few weeks ago, and it might have prompted a bit of reaction from the players. But, yeah, I don't know. Is that controversial? I'll leave it to others to decide. I think it'd be a brave, bold call by Corey to sit as captain for the playoff finals.
Well, I would guess that Brad Moran thinks it's controversial. But finally, Jono.
I will have a full house with Passel, because we all know what Mika Vikman is capable of in these sort of games, and I think he is our best chance to win the quarter-final against Sheffield, because we know what he can do. So you have to have Mika Vikman as the starting netminder. As for the other one, I would say I had a real think about this from when we received the question, and to my mind, I had to come to the conclusion that Logan McMillan would be my scratch, because that would then give us, you move Lindhagen back onto defence for 6 defencemen, 12 forwards. Because the thing with McMillan, yes, he's done a reasonable job in defence, but I think he's contributed very little offensively, and I don't think we can rely on him to come up with a goal or a play that will win us the game or score us a goal. So he would be my scratch. So McMillan and Passel for me.
You know what?
Go on, Paul.
I've completely forgotten Logan McMillan still played for us.
I'm not going to lie, there was a moment when Jono said it, there was a moment where I went, oh yeah.
Do we all message from Antoine Marijon, who isn't on tonight, obviously, but still thinks he can send us messages, which is a bit hypocritical as far as I'm concerned. But he says Lawrence and Passel for him. But what about you, Aaron?
Well, thank you for putting it on to me there, Mr. Balm. I obviously will go with Passel as well, because I agree with what Jono says. We've seen what Mika can do when it comes to this time of year, and when it comes to actually games that we've got to win. So he gets the nod for me. The other one, I think it's really tough. As you can tell, I had no plans to answer this question, but thank you, Paul. It's a tough. It's a tough one. I think you've all made good sort of like cases for the people, and I would possibly, out of the people that you've all suggested, I would potentially go with Jeff Waugh. I agree with like kind of the drop Lindhagen back onto D and go with 12 forwards, because the problem is, we do know our forwards have been a bit sort of goal shy this season, but they all can score a goal when needed. So that's what I would go for personally. But to be honest, I'm not Corey Nielsen. I think it's a tough decision, and I think the fact that we've had some people say Lawrence, we've had some people say Nikiforuk, we've had some people say Jeff Waugh. Adam said Brad Moran, the captain, very controversial. I think it kind of just shows you that, and to be fair, Jono said Logan McMillan. So that's, it'd be interesting to see who Corey actually, drops, and maybe he'll drop 2 different people, over the Saturday and the Sunday, depending on the result. But hey, if you're listening live now, what do you think to the people that we've mentioned? Get in touch, tell us who, if you were in Corey's shoes, who would you be having that conversation with? Because let's be honest, whoever they have that conversation with, you would like to think that they're going to be a little bit gutted, because, we know what playoff hockey is to ice hockey players. So we will wait and see. But we will move on to the next question, and this one comes from @Panthers_Lauren. And she says, with the Supporters Trust formal meeting tomorrow in mind, how will you guys be voting? That's obviously, if anybody is going to the meeting tomorrow, I will come to Andy first on that one.
I won't be voting because it doesn't interest me in the slightest, to be honest. So ask somebody else.
Okay. Adam, will you be voting at all?
What are we voting on? Sorry, just to act a bit dumb.
You're voting on the Supporters Trust for legally being formed.
Right, okay. I probably differ in my view about the merits of a Supporters Trust from Andy, because I have had involvement with the Notts County Supporters Trust many, many years ago. And I did see the good that they did for a number of years before it all unravelled a bit and things got a bit ugly. But I think that, Supporters Trust, I know we've talked about it several times over the course of the season since it was announced that they wanted to set one up, but I do actually think it is a good vehicle and a good voice for fans, because, we've heard over the course of the season that fans are quite, well, not all fans, I should say, but there's quite a large number of fans that are disenchanted with all manner of different things connected to the club. And I think that to have something like the Supporters Trust, even if the club aren't going to necessarily buy into the spirit of it and go along with everything that the Supporters Trust would like to see changed about the club, I certainly think it gives fans a platform, as it were, to get some of their concerns addressed and put some of these concerns to officials of the club. Now, I suppose the proof will be in the pudding. The club might not listen at all to the Supporters Trust, and if so, then it might not be the success that the people behind the Supporters Trust want it to be. But I probably would vote if I go along tomorrow. I would vote for the Supporters Trust to be set up. I think that there is certainly scope there, albeit limited, for them to make a meaningful impact in the affairs and the running of the club as a whole.
Okie dokie. Paul, I'll come to you next.
I'm not entirely sure why anybody would go to the meeting and not vote in favour of it, to be honest. But I can see other people's opinions about, like Andy said, he's not interested or whatever. That's fine. But me, hopefully, I will be there, and yes, I will be voting in favour of it.
I'll come to you last.
Unfortunately, I can't make it due to childcare issues. But if I was going, then yes, certainly I would be voting in favour of it being set up for exactly the reasons that Adam said. I can't add any more to what he said.
Okie dokie. If you'd like to know more, obviously, on the Supporters Trust, then just search for NP Supporters Trust, I believe it is, on Twitter. Jono, can you just confirm that for me?
It's at NP Supporters on Twitter. Nottingham Panthers Supporters Trust on Facebook, and the meeting will be taking place tomorrow in the Bolero Suite at the NIC. Doors open at 6:30 for a 7 p.m. start.
Okay, there you go. I shall move on to the next question now, and this one comes from the Cage Forum, and it's sent in by John Casey. A really good question for me, and I think one that we'll try and debate for the next few minutes. And John says, with no TV deal, the fact that the Elite League chairman told his club's fans not to go to away games, as well as winning his club's 50-50 draw, the issues with Dave Sims' comments that a referee with connections to a particular club is officiating some of that club's games, the recent controversy regarding playoff seedings, and the fact that Manchester were given a point for having unplayable ice, so the third period couldn't be played. And then he put in brackets, which thankfully didn't affect the final playoff places. Is this the worst run season by the Elite League? Jono, I'll come to you first on this, because there has been quite a bit of controversy this season, but you also wrote an article for the Cat's Whiskers website a week or so ago about that there's lots of things still to be positive about. So do you think that it has been the worst run season by the Elite League?
I think there's been a lot of things that have gone off that should have been dealt with far better than they have been dealt with. Whether it's been the worst run is probably subjective. I think it's probably getting that way. And yes, I did write the article about things to be positive about, the good that some clubs have done. But that doesn't take away from the fact that there are these issues and they are yet to be sorted out. I think the no TV deal is ridiculous. We a week and a half away from the playoff finals weekend, and we don't even know if or how it's going to be broadcasted, if there's going to be a webcast, if it's going to be on any TV channel. I mean, come on, that's ridiculous, frankly, for the showpiece weekend of the league season. That's just not good enough. We've talked about all the issues surrounding Dave Sims and Tony Smith, and that's a bit of a joke. We're going to come on to the referee shortly in another question. And then you've got the situation that happened in Manchester on Sunday. I believe there was somebody did tweet me and say there was a precedent for that.
It was Craig Simpson.
Yes, Craig Simpson. The Vipers against Manchester Phoenix, I believe, in Altrincham in an Elite League game. The same thing happened. But it's been pretty poor. It's been bad publicity, and it needs sorting out and dealing with.
I think for me, Jono, the mention on the TV deal is crucial for me, and I agree with what you said there. It's 2 weeks, a week, well, just over a week to go before the final showpiece, and we don't know whether it's going to be shown on a webcast or maybe even.
Last season there was 14 hours of live coverage on Premier Sports for the whole weekend, and they did a brilliant job putting all them games out live and having interviews and making a brilliant show. And this year we've got nothing, and that's just not acceptable.
Is that because you had the gilet of power as well, though, last year?
Nothing. Well, I mean, it was an honour to work on it, but I actually watched the coverage back in the week because I Sky Plused it, and it was superb coverage, and to go from that to nothing is just it's such a massive step backward.
Other TV recording software is available. Paul, I said earlier, you've watched hockey for many, many years. You've seen all, and yet you're only 21. It's amazing. Obviously you've seen all the Elite League years. I mean, is this the worst sort of run one for you?
I don't know. It does seem to be a number of issues, whereas most seasons you only get one or two. But you're two talking about the TV deals. The thing that gets me is the publicity. This is this is up there with Sheffield's black ice. In fact, you know when you look at this, the Elite League chairman's told his club's fans not to go to away games, as well as winning his club's 50-50. The issues with Dave Sims' comments that a referee with connections to a particular club. There is a certain theme developing, isn't there?
I mean, Adam, I'll come to you finally on this question. Do you just think that in today's world, there's social media, everybody has a voice, and they can immediately say what they want to say via all different type of social media platforms. With every year that goes by, more people want more information. They want more contact with everything. You didn't have that back 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc. So do you think that's played a role in it, in the sense of that we've had poor seasons, from the way it's been run, but we just maybe haven't heard about all those incidents, whereas this year, with the way social media is and media in general, we just have? Or do you agree that it has been the worst run season?
It's certainly been quite bad in terms of the number of crises that have cropped up and materialised over the course of the season, and it seems like one's dying away and then another one comes from nowhere. So it just seems like the whole season people have had to firefight to try and restore some sort of credibility to the sport in the Elite League. And to be honest, that's no way really to run what you'd call a professional sport in this country. I think you're right about social media. It's a dangerous tool because people can react and respond instantaneously, and you can't really guard against that because people might say silly things in the heat of the moment, which they might then instantly regret. But if you're in a position of power, and I think we all know who I'm referring to here, you ought to think long and hard about saying something. If you've got a microphone in front of you, or if you take to Twitter or Facebook or whatever to say something controversial, just think before you say it. Think about what the consequences might be. But the problem is, these things are said and they're out there in the open, and then, we're not even very good at damage limitation. It's not even like we've got spin doctors who work for the Elite League that can say, okay, move along, there's nothing to see here. And, the crisis has just, gained more and more momentum with every passing day until, I think we've talked about previously, it's starting to become really bad in terms of the image and the stature of the Elite League. So what I'm saying is, if you're in a position of responsibility, whoever you might be, and you're connected in an official capacity with a club, just think before you do something a bit stupid and outlandish, because there will be consequences.
Okie dokie. Well, thank you very much for your question, John. We will move on to another question, and this one comes from Ben Lovejoy, and he sent it in via email. And Ben says, is the credibility of the league called into question when appointing a good referee in Tom Perring, whom, from reading his Twitter page, lives in Sheffield and works for the university, to officiate so many Steelers games this season? Not every fan will agree with every ref, and this is in no means a reflection on the man himself, as he is not the worst ref I've seen this season, and I don't want to dwell too much on a specific decision. I appreciate the league is short on cash and doesn't want to buy hotel rooms for 3 officials up and down the country, but when a marginal call has to be made, his appointment to officiate his hometown club doesn't put him in an easy position or send out the right signals of impartiality from a professional sporting body. Andy, I'll come to you first on this one. I mean, we've had this obviously over many years with different referees that live in the same city as a team that they ref. Andy Carson springs to mind, Mike Hicks. So obviously the latest one is Tom Perring. But do you think the credibility of the league is called into question regarding Steelers games, for example?
I'm not sure it's called if like the credibility of the league is called into question because of that. I think ultimately it's called into credibility because of a lot of things. But I just think that it gives rise to this kind of talk. Rightly or wrongly, I ultimately I don't really have an issue with any of the refs really as such. But they all do things you dislike at some point during the night, and they all let you get away with something that you perhaps shouldn't have done every night. But I appreciate that having somebody from Sheffield refereeing a Sheffield game gives rise to this kind of question, and obviously there will be some people that are 100% opposed to it. The only thing I do have is obviously that there is a high proportion of referees that live in cities where there's a team, and it's ultimately because there's only so many places where these people can live ultimately because or where they can be from, because ultimately you think a lot of them are probably players that have played some level of ice hockey, whether that be recreational or juniors or anything like that. So you would think that they're going to be in areas where there are teams, because why else would they have been involved? It's not like it's a high calling for ice hockey officials in this country. So realistically, we only ever get officials that are at some way connected to some team, because they've going to either been a fan that's followed them, or they're going to have played the junior level, or like I say, a rec level, that sort of thing. Because for a start, they've got to know how to skate, so they've got to have learnt that some. And it's things like that perhaps don't often get thought about, and it's something that I've not really thought about until I read the question today. And I just think that, whilst having someone from Sheffield refereeing a Sheffield game will always, raise a few eyebrows, and if a decision goes one way or the other, it will, cause a bit of controversy. I just think that realistically, there's not really a lot we can do about it in that regards, because we've just not got the resource or the people interested in doing it.
John, I think Andy makes a good point there. We'd all love the ideal situation of having a large pool of referees to choose from, so this kind of question didn't arise. But we've probably got the same amount of referees as there is to teams in the league currently. And we don't want to get to the stage where we are questioning the credibility of a official, do we really? Because, these guys are doing it out of the love of the game, and we don't want to be saying that they're going to be making a decision with the thought of where they come from and the team that is in that city, do we really? So, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that really we've just got to get more referees, haven't we?
We have, but I think I need to start by saying that I don't believe for a second that any referee is biased towards any team. And also it's worth pointing out that the referees will know the rule book a damn sight better than the vast majority of fans who are sat watching the game. So I think that's another thing to point out. However, Ben makes a really good point. Tom Perrin shouldn't be put in that position, because then that leaves it open to the question, the same way that Andy Carson was when he was refereeing. And really, it should be, yes, we've only got a handful of referees, but then put them in the games where there's no conflict of interest or a perceived conflict of interest. That should be easy enough to do. And okay, it may be mean paying a little bit more in travelling expenses, but do it, because then you won't get these questions arising. I mean, I think
that's true.
A referee who I've seen very rarely, but every time I've seen him, he's done a good job. Is Toby Craig, and we don't, because he's based in Scotland, we don't see him down here very rarely, and he'd be one I'd like to see more of. But I think the referees should move around a lot more.
Because of how it's run, though, is their personal circumstance. I genuinely don't know the answer to this, but because of how it's ran, is their personal circumstances. I'm not suggesting that he does for 1 second, but does, as Toby Craig said, that I'm happy to do it, but I don't want to travel. I want to stay in Scotland.
I mean, that's a fair point, and I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I really, maybe even financial. I think it's availability. You have a midweek game that sort of starts at the NIC at 7:30 face-off. Obviously, the refs have to be there, I believe, an hour and something before face-off. He finishes work at, 5:30. He's going to be able to get to the NIC, whereas other refs that live further afield, they're not going to get there in time. So I would say it's more about availability than it is actually financial, because these refs have their own jobs. I don't think there's potentially maybe one ref that has the kind of like good availability to go to most venues at kind of midweek, etc. But the rest of them, they have full-time jobs. They're doing this out of the passion of the sport. So until that kind of changes, then the restriction for me is availability, not financial. But I don't know. I'd love to speak to an official and see whether, or somebody from the league, and see whether it could be down to financial reasons. I don't know. But we will move on to the next question. Question number 8 of 12. And this one comes from Geraldine Ellis via Facebook. And she says, how come the fans are treated as nobodies? A wonderful night for the sponsors. Thanks to the sponsors who made it another great night for the club. All the awards presented that night, surely at least the Fans Player of the Year should be presented in front of the fans, even if the rest are done on the sponsors' special night. The fans are the lifeblood of the club, yet they treat us as if we don't exist. Paul, I'll come to you first, because obviously you've written your latest article sort of relates to this kind of question, so I will let you respond to Geraldine's question first.
I think she's entirely right. I mean, don't get me wrong, there has to be a balance. Having sponsors are important. They bring money in and that, but we shouldn't be concentrating on the sponsors to the detriment of the average run-of-the-mill, for want of a better phrase, fan, like ourselves. I've lost count of the amount of money that over the years I've put into the club. So I've been going a long time, haven't I, Aaron?
I wouldn't know, Paul, to be honest.
No, I never tell anybody. That's the thing. So, yeah, one of the things I've been banging on about for years is the lack of interaction between the club and the fans. And events like that are only going to get worse. Okay, they had the showing of the film the other week, and some fans were lucky enough to win tickets to that. The answers I gave, I was never going to get my name picked out. But so I think there's got to be a balance. And again, it all down to perception. I mean, if you ask somebody who was a sponsor, they'd probably tell you that everything's marvellous and wonderful in the world. But there has to be a balance. There has to be something for the fans to make the fans feel as though they're part of the club.
Adam, do you feel that balance is wrong at the moment? Do you kind of agree with the sentiment that Geraldine sent into us?
I do. I agree, pretty much wholeheartedly with what Geraldine said there. I think there needs to be a recalibration of, the club's sort of outlook towards its wider fan base, because, I totally acknowledge the business and finance reasons behind why sponsors are, an absolute necessity. They do bring important income into the club. They probably help, pay for certain aspects of the club's running. But, they're not the be-all and end-all. If you look beyond the sponsors, of which, there probably aren't that many in number, look at the wider fan base of the club. There's thousands of us. But, I'm a long-term fan as well. And I've never felt more disillusioned and more distant from the club that I've, spent probably thousands and thousands of pounds watching, going up and down the country over the years. because I just don't think my support is. You don't want the club to say, "Oh, thank you for travelling the length and breadth of the country. You're special." There are different ways to make fans and fan bases feel special. I don't think we're necessarily treated with the respect that we deserve. I think that the club generally only sort of take fans seriously if they're willing to get involved in some of the things that help raise, funds for the club. Things like shirt auctions, for example. I've got no inclination of going along to every single shirt auction to buy, Logan McMillan's game worn shirt or Mika Viekman's game worn shirt. But, I support the club in a different way. But just because I go along to every game and I'm interested in the ice hockey, I feel like I'm some sort of a lesser class of fan than somebody that goes along to every single shirt auction, who gets the wallet out and, pays big bucks. And ultimately, that's their money, and they're free to do that, and I don't blame them. It's just that I don't necessarily think that that's the be-all and end-all of being a fan. And I think the club have lost sight of that over the years. I think that there's a massive sort of balance now that's swung back towards those that do want to buy shirts. It's just picking that as an example, but I, as a regular fan that just go along to watch the ice hockey, I don't feel like I'm necessarily listened to, or I really care, or so the club care about me, and that's not a very nice feeling for somebody that's been going for years and years.
Just to come in on this, just very quickly, I do agree that particularly with the fan voted award, should be done in front of the fans. But I've not sponsored a player since before we won the league. At least the last player I sponsored was Matt Francis, and it wasn't the league winning year at all. It might have been 2 years before that. And the reason I actually stopped sponsoring a player was because you got nothing out of it, really. The only thing you got, other than obviously the shirt, which was ultimately the reason why I did it, was you got the awards night at the end of the season. When I first did it, you used to be able to go down and watch training. Whenever you used to ring up and say, "Oh, I'm off work today. Can I come down and watch training?" They'd arrange it, and it was fine. But now you just sort of get lumped in, and if you can't make it, and it's tough. You just get told this is when it is. We'd like you to be there, but if you can't, then sorry, you've missed out. And once that started happening as well, you sort of think, well, what actually am I getting for my money here? Because ultimately, it's not a lot, especially with, to bring it back a subject that Adam touched upon with the shirt auctions. Like I say, the reason why I sponsored a player was to guarantee that shirt, ultimately. And realistically, the amount of shirt auctions just completely watered down how much you were paying for them in a lot of aspects, because you could pick up a bargain. But by the same token, there's that many of them now that they become 10 a penny and they're worth nothing. Even from a sentimental value, they're worth nothing. So I agree that as fans we should be treated a hell of a lot better than we are. But I do think that the sort of average sponsor, rather than your corporate sponsors, aren't technically treated any better, in my opinion.
Paul, I believe you had something that you wanted to come back on.
Yeah,
Adam was talking.
A couple of things. One is again on the subject of shirt auctions. When I've been to those, it's very, very clear. And what Adam was saying, it's very clear when you go to those that there is almost like an inner sanctum. There are those that are known, there are the regulars, and they are, for want of a better phrase, played up to. They're treated like long lost friends, and there's very much, I've felt, a feeling of us and them, and that's generated from the management. But the other thing I want to say is, and this is I'm probably joking here, really, is that when did you ever see the Panthers retweet somebody saying they'd been to their 500th or whatever game? It's always, I've been to my first game. Maybe people don't tweet them and say I've been to my 500th or however manyth game, but it just seems like, keep bringing them in. And once we've got them, we don't need to bother with them anymore. They'll either go, and if they go, we'll replace them. If they don't, they'll hang about, and then we've got them. Don't matter, they keep giving us money.
Yeah. I mean, just to bring this kind of one thing that obviously listening to you three guys talk about, the sponsors and the balance between the sponsors and obviously sort of, the fans that don't spend their money in that way. And I'll come to you, Jono, as you've not spoken on this. But I mean, in my eyes, if without the sponsors, there's kind of no team, because the financial input that they provide. But do you, like Paul said, do you think the balance of what the sponsors get to what the general fans get is wrong? Or are we just being too harsh on the organisation? Are we just getting too bogged down with this kind of view, and maybe we're just too far deep into that kind of disappointment and upset and anger and stuff? Or do you agree that the balance is wrong?
I think you're right in what you say, that without sponsors we don't have a club, and we need sponsors, and they put thousands of pounds in each season, and yes, they deserve some perks. I get that. However, I do think there is an imbalance, because we put thousands of pounds in of a season, as Adam has already said, but what do we get? We get a £1 discount for games that aren't on the season ticket, and that's about it. And that's only
for locker.
And that's only for your season ticket holder. So yeah, I do think there's an imbalance. I think the club could do a lot more to show some appreciation for the fans that go week in, week out.
Okay, I'll come back to that just very quickly, because obviously we've still got questions to answer. And I'll open it up to anybody. But with that, can you name something that another club does that we don't, that would make you as a season ticket holder feel more appreciated?
Well,
just off the top of your head.
Off the top, a season ticket that actually covers all the matches will be good.
Yeah.
And Belfast do that. I believe Cardiff do that. I was looking at Guildford's season ticket prices, and they're including all the games next season. So that would be good. I mean, get a season ticket that would include the CHL games, the Challenge Cup games, the playoff game. That'd be brilliant, because then you're not having to continually keep forking out for games that aren't on the season ticket. And I know somebody will come back and say, well, in football that doesn't happen. I know it doesn't, but it'd make things so much easier. Why don't you just have one price for all games that are played at home?
Yeah, but you don't want to commute to Guildford every week, Jono.
Well, no, of course not. It's a long way. But you
could have more flexibility, couldn't you? Yeah, I agree with you, Jono, when you say that there should be maybe one price and it guarantees you entrance to all games that we play during the course of a season. But what about if the club decided that, well, not everyone's going to be able to make every game? We understand that. But let's break it down and let's have, say, a separate sort of mini season ticket for those that just want to go to playoff games or Challenge Cup games or the Champions Hockey League games. I just think that the club needs to be a bit more flexible with the fans, because we're either all or nothing. And at the moment, I feel like I'm in the nothing camp, because we just don't get the respect, I think, that a very large and loyal fan base really ought to have. And, I don't know whether anyone else has got any sort of comment on this, but I've noticed in certainly the second half of this season, the turnover of different people that sit around us in the arena is incredible. You used to see people week in, week out. There were probably season ticket holders or people that couldn't afford the season ticket but always made sure that they could buy their ticket, early on in the week to guarantee, a seat close to where their friends are. That seems to have gone, to me. I don't know what other people's perspectives are that sit in different parts of the bowl, but there's a massive, massive turnover of, I was going to say fans, but people that go to the games. And I just think that's sort of a reflection of how the Nottingham Panthers operates as a sporting organisation. That they don't necessarily care about keeping the longer term fans happy. because we're sort of expendable, and we're a little bit set in our ways, and our views are a bit strident, and we can be dismissed. But it's all about those that are coming to their first game or their second or third game, because we want to make an impression and we want to make them feel special. Because if they get past 3 or 4 games, they might decide to become a season ticket holder next year. So just my sort of impression really of what I see around the NIC on a match day.
I mean, you've just got me kind of thinking while you've been talking, guys, and other sports, football, for example, rugby. I don't know whether any of you know people that are season ticket holders, or maybe you guys are, to be honest. But what do you get extra in those sports? So why should ice hockey be different? With and I might be completely wrong here. You might get extra perks if you are a football season ticket holder, or if you are a season ticket holder for the Leicester Tigers, for example. But do season ticket holders in those sports get any extra perks, or so why should ice hockey be different?
I think just to touch on a couple of things, I think the big perk with the sports like you mentioned, the football and the rugby, is because they are far superiorly followed. They get things like the away travel. They get first dibs on that, when realistically the chance of getting a ticket to go to an away game is going to be very slim. And obviously they usually lay on coaches and things like that. I know, from Tigers, obviously I'm not a season ticket holder myself, but we go as much as we can allow to with the hockey. But I know that obviously for away games they put on coaches, and it sort of goes to season ticket holders and then members of the club, and then it will sort of be put on to sort of general sale for sort of the people like myself. And I would imagine that football's probably even more stringent in that sense, because of the amount of people that want to go to these games. So I imagine that in its own right is quite a big perk, because although technically you're still having to pay for everything, and they might get a bit of a discount, I suppose, because they're getting it through the club. But I imagine that the actual perk is the fact that you're given the opportunity to go and watch them, that you probably wouldn't be able to do if, like I say, you weren't a season ticket holder, like myself.
And not to obviously talking about away games, but to play devil's advocate, don't we get offered that as season ticket holders? Don't we get the offer of buying our season ticket seat before anybody else, before they go on general sale? And I know it's a £1 discount, but we get a discount. So playing devil's advocate, don't we get that as well then?
Yeah, I and for me personally, I pay my season ticket to come and watch the games. So realistically, I personally think I get value for money in that sense, because it's cheaper than if I paid for the tickets on their own week in, week out. So on a personal standpoint, I don't necessarily have a problem with the sort of the season ticket holder issue, but that's my personal thing. There'll be people that will have.
Okay, we shall move on, because Geraldine, you've just gave us a question that we've talked about for about 15 minutes or so. So we shall try and get through the rest of the questions now. So number 9 comes from Max Artis via Facebook, and he says, has the rivalry in British hockey gone, as the majority of games don't have the energy of years past? What do you think is to blame? Does the league need to play less games and extend the playoffs, or promote more teams to expand the league and make games more vital, as you would play teams less often? Well, obviously, regarding the last kind of question and bit there, obviously more teams coming into the league next. We're still yet to hear what the conference system will be, if there will be one, and the games to ratio in those conferences. But Paul, I'll come to you first. Has a rivalry in British hockey gone? And what do you think is to blame for that, as we look forward to our God knows how many meeting with Sheffield this coming weekend.
13th and 14th.
Is it?
And I think that's where the problem lies. Familiarity breeds contempt, or, to be honest, disinterest. Almost. It's them. If we don't, I mean, I know it's a bit different this weekend, but if in the league, it's almost, if we don't beat them this week, there'll be another one along in a minute. It's like catching a bus. Oh. Yeah, I mean, well, there's been a lot of rumours about changes to the conference. If we didn't play Sheffield as often as we do now, then yeah, it might not be financially be a great thing, but in terms for the fans, it builds those games back up. I was watching a football game the other day. I forget who it was. It was a South Yorkshire derby. Like two really old teams, and they said this is it's about the 110th or something meeting of the two teams ever. We've played Sheffield 62 times in the last 5 seasons, including this weekend. It doesn't, it's great. It happens too often. Yes, it'd be great if you could expand. We had enough teams so that we didn't have to play them as often. But maybe if these rumours about the conference changes are true, maybe that will go some way to helping it. We'll still be playing Coventry too many times, though.
I mean, Jono, I think we'd all be in agreement that we want to see, the rivalry of years gone past come back to the Elite League. And I think, in fairness, some rivalries have kind of been reborn and they're getting stronger. But from our point of view, I think the majority of fans do feel that the rivalry has dwindled. But what do you think is to blame for that?
Well, there's a decent rivalry going on between Fife and Bray, so I don't think it's throughout the league, and I think there's a decent rivalry between Coventry and Cardiff, and probably next season Coventry and Milton Keynes, because that'll be quite local. However, I think the problem with Panthers Sheffield has already been said. We just play each other far too many times, and yes, they sell out, yes, they get big crowds, but they're just not events anymore like they used to be. I mean, I remember when they first came into the league, we played them twice at home, twice away. And in the B&H Cup, as it was then, qualifiers, so 6 times, and then if we met them in say the playoffs or the in any of the finals, but generally 6 times, and they were events. And because of the restricted capacity of the old ice stadium, tickets were like gold dust. And yes, I just think it would be better if Panthers and Sheffield were split up in separate conferences. I don't think it'll happen because financially it's not going to appeal to either Sheffield or Nottingham. But I think to make that rivalry an event again, that is what has to happen.
But just very quickly, you mentioned Coventry, Cardiff and Fife Brayhead. Those 4 teams in those 2 rivalries, they're from the same conference. Similar to Sheffield and Nottingham, Cardiff and Coventry play each other exactly the same amount of times, and Fife and Brayhead play exactly the same amount of times. So what is it that they've got that the Steelers, Panthers games haven't?
They've got smaller venues.
And you think it's literally, it is down to kind of the fact that people have to get in quick and want those tickets if they want to go.
And with a smaller venue, the atmosphere is generally a lot better as well.
Okie dokie. Right, thank you very much for that question, Max. We shall soldier on. And the next one comes from Kim Harris, at Kim Ruby Harris on Twitter. And Kim says, if the players are not performing and it's not the coach's fault, what responsibility does the manager have? And Adam, I'll come to you first on that one.
The manager, does Kim mean
I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine that Kim means the general manager of the club. I would hope to think. Sorry, Kim, if we've got that wrong. But yeah, let's go with the general manager.
Well, I'll kind of proceed on the basis that Kim's referring to Guy Moran. It's difficult, isn't it? Because no one's quite sure what the full extent of Guy Moran's responsibilities and duties are. You listen to different people, and you get different versions about how influential he is in terms of recruitment and advising Corey on, sorts of players that he needs to go out and recruit. Other people say, oh no, he stands totally away from that and just lets Corey get on with things and recruit the players that he wants, and Moran just goes out and makes sure that we can get them. So it's difficult to understand from a playing perspective and an on-ice perspective what sort of impact Guy Moran has. What I will say, though, is that I do think you can sort of get the tone of a club from the general manager. And I think, as we've seen down in Cardiff, Todd Kelman has been absolutely fantastic. It's been a real revelation for that organisation, because it just seems that everyone's fallen in behind him. And that's brought an incredible unity across the whole sort of organisation. That sort of loyalty that we could never, ever hope to get at Nottingham Panthers while ever Guy Moran is the general manager. So I think that it's difficult, isn't it? Because it's been a wretched season. Obviously, we've had the Continental Cup, which has been a very, in my opinion, small shining light. But it is difficult to know exactly where the blame should lie in terms of how bad things have been this season. I'm sure everyone would be willing to admit to a little bit of blame over how things have panned out. But, unless we actually know more about the day-to-day sort of things that take place within the confines of the club, it's difficult to know whether the general manager has had any sort of bearing on how poor that the players have performed generally throughout the league campaign.
I mean, Andy, I'll come to you on this question as well, but general managers in more famous leagues such as the NHL, they roster, they do all those dealings, etc., and then it's up to the coach to coach the team and get the results. Over here, it's a lot different. The general manager role is I would say it's more about making sure that financially the club is sound, etc., and the off ice aspect of it. But in relation to Kim's question, do you think, or what would you say is the responsibility of the manager? Does it have any when the team isn't performing?
It's actually a really difficult question to actually give a definitive answer, because I think there are lots of different intangibles in it, and I think ultimately when it comes to what we see on the ice, I don't think there's a lot that you can sort of put any sort of, whether that's credit or disregard for the general manager. But I do agree with Adam that they can be incredibly powerful in the sense that they can set the tone, and they probably should set the tone realistically. I do agree with what Paul said in his latest article, that the focal point and the centre point of the team should be the coach, and I don't think it is in this club.
Yeah, agree.
But I do think that the general manager has an important role in sort of setting the tone of the club. And obviously it's easy to look at examples when they're successful, but Todd Kelman's been mentioned, and I think it's only fair that we sing his praises as to how well he's done, both in Belfast and now in Cardiff. And it's no surprise that the success is following him around, because he knows what he wants from his club. He gets the people in that he wants to do it, and there's success on the back of it. And whether rightly or wrongly, there's criticism regarding some of the acquisitions of stuff, but that he's got. I seem to recall that there was a few comments regarding his off-ice, like analytical crew, if that's what it is. But at the end of the day, he hires them, or they're volunteers, and they do it for the games, and they've won the league for doing it. Whether that's any credit to them or not, but they're employed by the club, and he does. He picks who he wants, and he gets the results. And I think that. I do think that what we see on the ice ultimately usually pins down to the coach. I do think that there are times when it's perceived that the coach has his hands tied behind his back by one aspect or another. I do think apologies, Paul, but I think it was your article, but I could be wrong, where it was mentioned about the fact that this season Corey seems to be an awful lot more vocal in not outing players as such, but sort of taking them to task a little bit, more so than we've ever seen him do before. And I think that this season has been a challenge, and I do genuinely think that he's been let down by an awful lot of the players. And yes, you can argue that if that's the case, then he should have put his foot down earlier or whatever. But then, like I say, there's been times during the season where I genuinely think that his hands have been tied with regarding, replacements or recruitment or, the injuries and stuff like that. There was a time when we would have loved to have got rid of 3 or 4 players, but then we had 3 or 4 injuries. And can you imagine the outcry if we were gassing players left, right and centre whilst we hadn't replaced the injured guys? There are circumstances where, in my opinion, he just couldn't win. I just think that realistically, I do think that as much as the coach will always be, or certainly usually is the sort of the first port of call when things go wrong, I can't help feeling let down more by the players' side of it than I have done by the coaching this season.
While we're on this question, I'm gonna jump forward a question and come to our question number 12 on our agenda. Yes, we do have an agenda, folks. While we're still talking about the GM role, and Left Shot 27 from the Cage asks us: do the panel think, given our resources and potential for further growth, Paul Adey as GM could have a similar impact as Todd Kelman? So, Jono, I'll come to you first, as we've not heard your beautiful voice for a while.
My dulcet tones. No, I think Adey could have a very good impact as general manager. And I've been lucky enough to work with Paul Adey over the past year, and he's an incredibly professional man who does a lot of research, and I think would be a superb face at the head of the Nottingham Panthers. Would he have a similar impact as Todd Kelman? You're not going to know that until if or when, or if ever he's in the role. But I certainly would like to see him given the chance to, because I think he would be excellent at that job.
He is bandied around as potentially the next coach of the Nottingham Panthers, whenever that may be. But as a GM, do you think he could have an impact similar to Todd Kelman?
So was that to me, Aaron?
I said to Paul, but...
to Paul.
That's right.
You cut out temporarily.
So who are we saying instead of Adey?
Could Paul Adey have a similar impact as Todd Kelman if he were ever to become the GM of the Nottingham Panthers?
It's difficult to say. He's not had a role like this before, so we don't know. And what is the role? At the end of the day, even when Gary Moran has been asked, his answer has been, cagey, shall we say. He likes to tell people sometimes what it isn't. But I think, if I'm honest, the time has come for a change. We are in a situation now where I think we are stagnating. Yes, we're getting bodies in through the door, and that is what a GM should be measured on. It shouldn't be anything else. He shouldn't be measured not making a gaff at a sponsor's evening or anything like that. You shouldn't know who a GM is. For me, he should be somebody who does the business side of it, keeps away from everything else. The fans shouldn't care either who it is, because it should all be all about the coach and the team.
I mean, does anybody think anybody kind of within the Panthers organisation could potentially step up to be a GM? Maybe down the line in I don't know, whenever that time may come. But I don't know, somebody. If we go player-wise, somebody, I don't know, like Clarkey, obviously coming towards the end of his playing career and has joined, obviously, the coaching staff. But, I mean, could we see somebody like that maybe stepping up in a few years' time? I mean, does anybody think that
Possibly.
Could be a possibility? I mean, Adam,
Possibly.
I'll come to you on that.
Yeah, well, I think... I don't know David Clark, but to me, he seems more suited to a coaching role than an administrative role. And I totally agree with Paul that the barometer of a GM's success ought to be how invisible they are, because if a GM's doing his job properly, then everything will tick over nicely. The crowds will be high, you'll be putting a good product out on the ice, and everything will run seamlessly. I just think Paul Adey seems to be the consummate professional. Everybody that you speak to in the game seems to have infinite amount of respect for the guy. All the sort of qualities and traits that you'd want to have, in your general manager. So I think that, if Paul Adey wasn't the next coach of the Nottingham Panthers, then he would make a damn fine general manager just because he understands hockey. And I think that the present incumbent of that role, doesn't understand hockey, if I can be so blunt, and it seems to be a bit more of a vanity project, whereas I'm sure Paul Adey wouldn't really want to be in the limelight nearly as much as the present incumbent of that particular position.
Okie dokie. We shall move on from that question, but thank you very much, Left Shot 27, and we come to our final question of the evening as time is ticking, and this one comes from the cage again, from number 29. And they ask, following on from last night's awards, who would you vote for as your player, forward and D-man of the year? And also the player who's not lived up to your expectations this year. So firstly, I'm just going to say number 29. I'm going to ask the panel not to say your player, because after playoffs, there will be a special piece on the Cat's Whiskers website where we will be doing our Cat's Whiskers awards, and one of those awards is for player of the year, so I'm going to keep that one until then. So forward, D-man, and the player who's not lived up to your expectations this year. Andy, quickly, I'll come to you first.
Forward for me, McGrattan. Defenseman for me, Lindhagen, and not lived up to expectations. I'm going to say Jeff Dimon. I just think he's not performed to a standard that we saw last season, and I think quite considerably as well.
Okie dokie. Paul, I'll come to you next.
Oh dear. I was hoping you'd come to me last, give me more time to think. So few of them haven't lived up to their expectations. Forward, I'll go with the sloth himself. I'll go with Robert Farmer. Defenseman, can I say
really
Chris
should have come
Lawrence?
to you last.
I say Chris Lawrence because when he's on the power play, it kills it stone dead. Go on, I'll say Lindhagen at a push. Player who's not lived up to their expectations. I'm tempted to say everybody else, but go on. I'll have Matt Carter.
Okay, Adam.
Best D for me would be Lindhagen, which is amazing because he's not really a natural defenseman, which is a bit of a damning indictment of everybody else on the blue line. Best forward, Robert Farmer, and similar to Paul, I think everyone else that I've not mentioned has failed miserably to live up to expectations.
And finally, Jono.
Forward, Robert Farmer, without any shadow of a doubt. D-man, I'm going to go for Spang, because I don't think he deserves half the criticism he gets, and he puts in a lot of minutes. So he will be my D-man, and not lived up to expectations. After all I heard about him in Gap last summer, it's got to be Matt Carter.
How did I know you were going to say that? Right, okay, we will wrap that up there, folks. We have gone on a bit tonight, but I think there's been some really good discussion in there. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this Ask TCW podcast. As I said at the very beginning of the show, this is our last but one Ask TCW podcast. So there is still time to get some more questions into us as we return for the final time this season next Wednesday night. But all it remains for me to say is thank you very much to Andy Haywood.
No worries at all, anytime.
Thank you to Adam Reddish.
Cheers, mate. Been a pleasure as ever.
Thank you to Jono Bullard.
Thank you very much. Great show as always.
And finally, thank you to Mr. Paul Balm.
Thank you, but I'm not saying anything nice to you.
Why change the habit of a lifetime?
Precisely.
Thank you very much for joining us this week. If you're going to obviously hockey this weekend, then cheer loud, and hopefully it will be the right result. But for the time being, thank you very much, and we will see you next week. Bye bye.